Hello and welcome, and in this video I'll be showing you how to animate latch switches according to our SRS. Today we'll be animating the outflow forward latch switch here on the pressurization subpanel. As you can see, it's just inanimate right now. It just does not work at all. And so let's get started. Let's go into Blender and select all this stuff and delete it. We don't need any of that stuff. And let's go to import AC. Let's import our overhead panel, and just navigate to your FG aircraft folder. Go to models, flight deck, overhead panel, and import that. You can come up here in the top right corner of your scene and press the X button to get that front view, and then you can zoom in by scrolling on your mouse. And then you can do shift middle mouse to pan around, and we'll pan to the pressurization subpanel. And so if we look at this, the first thing we need to do is we need to retexture this. We can do that by going to our PNGs in our Google Drive and downloading the correct PNG for this latch switch. So now this is the pressurization subpanel, and so I'm going to download the pressurization PNG. So just download that. Show in folder. We're going to copy this and navigate to our FG aircraft folder. Go back to where you got the overhead panel AC file. So that's in models, models flight deck, and just paste it anywhere in here. And you can see this is the same location as the Blender file, so it should have the same. Should be in the same folder. So you can exit out of that. We're done with that. And let's go into Blender. We have to. The way we're going to do this is that we're going to have a static button that is not going to transition in any way for right now. And then we're going to have two objects that kind of overlap it that have the indicators. So let's start by texturing this. Go to the top right, and you'll see these crosshairs, and then click and drag to get this second window. And let's go to our shader editor, and you can click this editor type button up here and select shader editor. And here we have where all the texturing and shading happens. So currently this latch switch is being textured by this PNG file, which is not correct. Now, if we want to retexture this, we would have to make a new material, and let's call this material pressurization, because we're on the pressurization subpanel. If I was on the anti-ice subpanel, I would name this anti-ice, or well, that doesn't have latch switches. So maybe if I was on the lights subpanel, I would name this material lights or something like that. So we have the new material here, and so we can open a new PNG, the PNG we just downloaded, and open that image, and we can see that this latch switch has already been changed. Now we want to remap that UV mapping, so go to your editor type, go to UV editor, and then while you're make sure you have this latch switch selected, go into edit mode. You can do that by either clicking this and selecting edit mode, or you can press tab. Either one works. If you don't have it selected, and let's say you go into edit mode, whoops, then you won't see anything happen up here. That just means you just need to reselect this in edit mode. So let's take your mouse and have a little select box over it, and then it'll reselect that object for you, and this UV map will appear once again. So let's select this, and let's we want this image here. So let's scale it by using S, and then G to kind of freely move it around. Scale it again. And then we can scale it in a specific direction if we want by pressing scale and then the direction we want to scale it in. So I want to scale this in the X direction, so I'm going to press X, and we can see that it's going to scale that way. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that looks pretty good. So that handles that. We can rename this object to something more logical. So maybe we'll name it forward outflow or something like that. And so next we need to do the indicators, and we're going to do that by simply we're going to select this button now, and we're just going to make a copy of this. So let's do that. Let's do Control C, and then it's going to say copied one selected object down here, and then we can do Control V, and it's going to paste that. This is one object pasted down here. And so if we just keep that object selected, don't click anything else, go to your move tool, and as you can see, you don't see the move tool anywhere, but if you do right click and set origin to geometry, there now we have that move tool, and this is the copy of that latch switch that we just made. So we're just going to translate it, translate it this way, and then up a little bit. And so we're going to texture this with an indicator. So let's go back to opening our another screen here, and go to shader editor. And just like before, we're not making a new material, but we're just selecting the material we just made, pressurization, and I have the wrong button selected. This button. Make sure you have this button selected. Go over here and select the material you just made. Otherwise, what I just did there, I just had this one selected, which is what you don't want, because I'm doing this button right now. So make sure you have this object selected here, and go to this material, and then we can go to our UV editor and press tab or go into edit mode, and here is that UV mapping. So we want this to be the auto indicator, so press G, and we're just gonna let's scale it in the Y direction a little bit, and then maybe in the X direction, something like this. And that looks really big. What we can do is, in this window, we can go back into object mode, and we can just take this object that we just made and scale it in the Z direction. So we can press S and then Z to scale it. Press G to move it around, and that still looks pretty big. We can press S to do a regular scale, and you can just keep on messing around with it that way. That looks pretty good, I'd say. And then that looks a bit too far away from our actual button, so we can, with the move tool, if you have the object selected, you can click and hold the red arrow and just kind of push it back to where it just barely sits over the other auto word there. And there we go. That looks pretty good, I'd say. Next thing we can do, we could also scale this in the X. Maybe that looks better. Let me see. Whoops, scale in the X. It's fine the way it is. Let's put that back. Alright, next we need to do the other indicator. And so same thing as before. Let's copy and paste this, and then let's move it. To use this function, the move tool, you can either zoom out and use it here, or I'd like to use the tool while it's on the actual object. So you can do set origin to geometry, and it'll bring that tool to the center of your object that you're working on. And we can just kind of, using these arrows, manipulate it to our liking. And then same thing as before. We want to make sure we have it selected. Go to our shader editor and select the material that we made. Go to UV editor, press tab or go into edit mode, and we want to remap this UV mapping. Like so. Okay, and so, oh wait, we want this to be the manual. So let's do that. And that looks kind of big. So we can scale this object again in the Z direction by pressing S and then Z. And then moving it and then scaling it again to our liking. That looks pretty good, I'd say. Let me see. And so that's it for the indicators. We can rename these to something more logical. Maybe rename this forward outflow auto, because we named the main switch here forward outflow. We can say this is forward outflow auto, and we can name this forward outflow man. Alright, and so to save this, let's go to File, Export AC, and a little important note, if you're in edit mode and you try to export it, it's not going to let you. It's going to give you like an error. So just make sure you're in object mode whenever you export files. Then navigate back. This is the ohpanel.ac file, so navigate back to that file and click on it to overwrite it and export. And if you go into VS Code, you'll notice that the Blender file has been modified, and that we have a new file, which is the PNG file that we imported. So next we need to animate the actual latch switch, and that's going to require a lot of XML code, which I'll show you. It's going to require now this button doesn't have any XML code to it because it was inanimate or unanimate, what have you. So it's not going to have any sort of XML tied to it. But if, let's say, if like these buttons I think work already, but they don't transition correctly, so you'd have to search those up and then delete the code that's there and then make new code. So just make sure. I know these don't exist in the ohpanel.xml file, just because they're inanimate. But if they did exist, I would delete whatever animation they had and just start over. And so to animate these buttons, we're going to need a few animations. We're going to need a Going to need a pick animation. We're going to need a select animation for each indicator. And then we're going to need a translate animation. This is all just for one latch switch. And so the pick animation, that's going to be for the actual static. So not this indicator and not this indicator, but just the actual button itself. We need this to have a pick animation, so that way the user can select it anywhere in this square. So this object is called forward outflow, and we'll put it there. So this pick animation is being applied to this object. Let me see. Now we need an action associated with this animation. The action is initiated with a button, and that button is going to be left click, which is in XML code that's represented by a 0. And then I believe we need a binding. Let me see here. Action. You can look at other pick animations as well. They'll give you kind of a good layout. They have a pick, object, and then action, and then the button. And we need this repeatable piece of code here. And then we have a binding. So we have the pick, object, action. We need to say if it's repeatable, which means if it's set to true, that means you can click and hold the button, and that'll do something. So for that particular button I was looking at, that's for a knob, and so you would want to be able to hold down, to click and hold that particular button. For this is just a latch switch. So we just want if it's set to false, then you just click it once. If you click and hold, it doesn't do anything. And for the binding, this is what happens when you select the latch switch. Let's do a property toggle. And then the actual property, which we'll just name, let me see. We'll name this controls slash pressurization. Since this, I know for a fact this doesn't have any pressurization subpanel, is completely is not implemented at all. So it doesn't have. Let's say, for example, if this button was implemented, I would store the property where this property for this toggle switch would be. But since nothing is implemented, I'm making a whole new kind of property tree folder, and in that folder, I'll name this property forward outflow. And then I think that's it. Usually you would have values here. So like I want this to be a Boolean value. So if it's Boolean, you don't need to specify values. If it's an integer, you usually want to specify values here. I think that the default, if you don't specify values, is always 0, 0, and 1, true and false, that sort of thing.